350 guests watched my daughter introduce a complete stranger as her father. My name is David Moore, and I just finished paying $500,000 for her wedding. Picture this, your own daughter telling an entire ballroom that you're dead while hugging another man she calls daddy. Meanwhile, every vendor, every flower arrangement, every piece of crystal was funded by the bank account of the dead father sitting alone at table 18. But here's what Victoria didn't know when she erased me from her story. Every contract had my signature, every payment came from my company, and I was holding the final check, $340,000, that would keep her perfect reception running. 26 years of raising her, 6 months of planning her dream wedding, one moment of complete betrayal that changed everything. What happened next shocked even me, and it definitely wasn't what those Greenwich socialites expected from a simple plumber in a borrowed tuxedo. Before I tell you how this story ends, I have to ask, have you ever been invisible in a room full of people celebrating something you made possible? If this story hits home, hit that subscribe button. I post real stories about everyday justice, and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Because tonight, my daughter learned that some bills come due in ways you never see coming. The Ashford Estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Saturday, June 15th, 2024, 4:30 p.m. I pulled my 2019 Ford F-150 into the valet line behind a parade of Bentleys and Mercedes. The valet kid couldn't have been more than 20. Looked at my truck like I'd brought a dead fish to dinner. But he took my keys anyway. Professional courtesy, I guess. My rental tuxedo from Men's Warehouse felt like a costume. $89 for the day. Meanwhile, every other man here wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I could tell by the way the fabric moved. You don't build a business for 30 years without learning the difference between quality and pretense. But they had no idea who was really paying for their champagne. Inside, crystal chandeliers worth $25,000 each cast light over 350 of Connecticut's finest. The guest list read like a who's who of old money, families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. And there was Victoria, my daughter, floating through the crowd in her $32,000 Vera Wang gown. She saw me enter. Our eyes met across the room. She looked away. A wedding planner with a clipboard and headset approached me. "You must be—" She checked her list. "Table 18. Table 18. By the kitchen door, where catering staff rushed back and forth with trays. Where the sound system had a faint buzz. Where families seat the relatives they have to invite, but don't want to explain." "That's me," I said. And Victoria was at table 1, center of the room, spotlight position, with her new family, the Whitmores. Preston Whitmore III was her husband-to-be. Preston Whitmore Sr. owned half the commercial real estate in Fairfield County. They had money that was old when my grandfather was still farming in Ohio. I took my seat and watched my daughter work the room. She moved differently now, practiced, like she'd been born to it. When guests asked about her family, she'd point toward table 1 and smile. "My father's right over there," she'd say, gesturing toward a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and a custom tuxedo. Richard Morrison. I'd never seen him before in my life. Meanwhile, my table filled with +1s and distant cousins. Nice people, but not the kind who get mentioned in the Connecticut Society pages. We made small talk about the weather and the beautiful venue. Nobody asked what I did for work, probably for the best. 26 years of raising that girl, 26 years of scraped knees and bedtime stories and dance recitals. I'd missed exactly 3 of her birthdays, all because of emergency calls. Burst pipes don't wait for convenient times, but I always made it up to her, always. I paid for her private school when her grades suffered in public, $14,000 a year for Fairview Academy. I paid for her college, Yale no less, $68,000 a year for 4 years. I paid for her apartment in Manhattan when she couldn't find work after graduation, $3,000 a month for 2 years. And now I was paying for this wedding, every detail. The venue rental, $180,000. The catering, $85,000. The flowers, $28,000. The string quartet from the New York Philharmonic, $15,000. The photographer, $12,000. The 7-tier cake, $8,500. But Victoria had made one crucial mistake in her eagerness to fit in with Greenwich society. She'd forgotten to read the fine print on her dream wedding. The cocktail hour stretched on, and the distance between my table and hers felt like miles. I watched Victoria pose for photos with the Whitmores, playing the role of the grateful daughter they'd saved from obscurity. Every smile was a knife twist. If I stayed silent tonight, if I stayed silent tonight, I'd become exactly what she'd already decided I was, invisible. So I didn't stay silent. The ballroom lights flickered once, then again, before dimming completely. Murmurs rose through the crowd, guests shifted in their chairs, startled by the sudden darkness. The hum of the air conditioning stopped. The quartet's violins trailed off mid-melody. And for a brief second, the only light in the room came from the glow of the chandeliers reflecting off champagne glasses. I didn't plan it that way. But sometimes fate knows the perfect dramatic cue. I looked across the hall. Victoria's face went pale in the candlelight. The wedding planner's radio crackled in panic. "The generator's down. Water pressure too. The bar taps won't run." The guests whispered like startled birds. I simply leaned back, folded my hands and waited. Because if there was one thing my 30 years as a contractor taught me, it's that people only notice plumbing when it stops working. The beginning of a reckoning. The ballroom doors opened, and two men in black service uniforms darted in with flashlights. The crowd collectively sighed with relief. Victoria stood in the center of the room, her diamond necklace catching the low light. She raised her voice, calm and commanding. "Everyone, it's just a minor outage. Please keep enjoying yourselves." Even in chaos, she held herself like royalty. The kind of grace you can't teach, only inherit. But she didn't inherit it from the man she was calling Dad. For a second, her eyes found me across the room. That brief flicker of panic I'd seen when she was 5 and spilled grape juice on her recital dress. Back then, I'd told her, "It's okay, honey. We'll clean it up." Now, I wanted to tell her the same thing. But this stain wasn't going to wash out so easily. Then she turned away. That was it, the moment she broke me. The toast that no one expected. The music paused completely. Guests filled the silence with polite murmurs. The planner rushed around, clutching her clipboard. That's when I stood up. My chair scraped against the polished marble floor, a small sound, but it carried. Dozens of heads turned. A server tried to intercept me, whispering, "Sir, please remain seated. We'll have it fixed momentarily." But I wasn't walking to the maintenance room. I was walking toward the microphone. Step by step, through the crowd that parted like silk curtains, I reached the front podium beside the cake. The 7-tier masterpiece stood tall, 80 pounds of fondant, sugar flowers, and expensive frosting. I adjusted the microphone. It squealed, loud and shrill, and the chatter stopped. "Good evening," I said slowly. "My name is David Moore." Murmurs rippled. Several people looked confused. "I know most of you don't know me, though some of you may have heard about me, or maybe you haven't. That's all right. I'm used to being behind the scenes. I fix things. I build things. Mostly, I just make sure everything keeps running. Quietly." A nervous laugh trickled somewhere near the back. "Tonight, I paid for everything you see in this room. Every flower, every fork, every chandelier. My company, Moore Restoration and Plumbing Company, handled the contracts, the deposits, and the payments." Victoria froze, her hands trembling around her champagne glass. "I built a business for 30 years from a single truck and a promise. And I built something even more important. A daughter I thought would never forget where she came from." The words came easier than I expected. "But tonight I found out I died," I said quietly. "At least that's what I heard when she introduced another man as her father." Gasps swept the room. "Now don't worry," I added with a tired smile. "I'm not here to haunt anyone. Just to tell the truth, the kind of truth you don't get in fancy speeches or glossy magazines." Victoria whispered, "Dad, please." But her voice broke halfway through. "You see, when you grow up without money, you learn what things cost. Not just in dollars, but in sacrifice. I worked nights, weekends, winters so cold the pipes froze in my truck. All so this girl could have choices I never did. And tonight, she chose to forget me." The ballroom was silent except for the soft hum of the generator kicking back in. Lights returned, bathing everything in cruel brightness. You wanted fairy tale perfection, I continued, and I wanted you to have it. But even fairy tales need foundations, and every foundation in this place, every single one, was poured with my hands. I took the folded check from my jacket pocket and held it up. This, right here, is the final payment. $340,000. Without this, the contracts don't close. Without this, nothing tonight belongs to you, legally or otherwise. A ripple of shock moved through the guests. But don't worry, I said, lowering the mic. I'm not here to destroy your wedding. I'm here to teach you something no amount of money can buy. Respect. I tore the check in half. The sound echoed louder than the applause that never came. Half went into my pocket, the other half I placed on the podium. Half now, I said, my voice steady. Half when she remembers who built her dreams. Silence. Not the polite kind, the heavy kind. The kind that lingers like smoke after a fire. Preston Whitmore III looked at me with the same expression his father wore. Disbelief mixed with disgust. To them, I wasn't a man. I was an inconvenience. A problem they couldn't buy their way around. Victoria's mascara ran slightly down her cheek. "Why would you humiliate me?" she whispered. I met her eyes. "I didn't. You did that the moment you erased me. Then I walked away. No one stopped me. Not the planner, not the groom, not even the fake father she introduced. The only sound behind me was the echo of her heels. But she didn't follow. Outside, the cool Connecticut air cut through my rented tux. I loosened my tie and looked back at the glowing estate. Through the tall glass windows, I could see her still standing there, small, trembling, surrounded by people who would never truly understand her. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Sometimes revenge isn't satisfaction, it's survival. The next morning, my phone rang non-stop. Voicemails, reporters, vendors, even guests. Apparently, someone recorded my entire speech. It was already online, titled, "Plumber Dad Calls Out His Daughter at $500,000 Wedding." By sunrise, it had 1 million views. By afternoon, 10 million. Half the internet called me heartless. The other half called me a hero. I didn't care about either. But the Whitmores cared, a lot. Their law firm sent me an email requesting clarification on contract ownership. I replied with scanned copies of every invoice and deposit, all filed under Moore Restoration and Plumbing Company, legally binding until the final check cleared. In short, everything that glittered in that ballroom was still mine. 2 days later, I got a visit from Richard Morrison, the man who played my role. He showed up at my office wearing the same expensive watch he wore that night, but without the same confidence. "Mr. Moore," he started stiffly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No," I said, "there's been a revelation." I slid a folder across my desk. Contracts, receipts, proof of ownership. "You can tell the Whitmores," I said evenly, "that the only misunderstanding was believing money can rewrite bloodlines." He didn't have a response, just that same embarrassed silence rich men wear when they realize they've underestimated a blue-collar hand. That night, my phone rang again. "Dad." Her voice was soft, shaky, not the polished tone of the Greenwich debutante, the one from years ago when she'd call after school just to tell me about her day. "Dad, please, I didn't mean for it to go like that." I said nothing. "I just wanted them to like me," she whispered. "Preston's family kept asking about you, about your work." I panicked. I thought if I made them think I came from somewhere else, they'd respect me more. "Did it work?" I asked quietly. She was silent for a long time, then, "No." "Good," I said, "because real respect can't be borrowed. It has to be earned." "I know," she said, crying now. "I messed everything up." "No," I said softly. "You just forgot who built the walls around your dreams." But forgetting isn't the same as losing. You can still remember. "Can I come home?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "The door's open." "Always has been, but you'll have to walk through it on your own." The story didn't just fade, it exploded. Talk shows debated whether I was justified. People sent letters, cards, even job offers for Victoria to rebuild her life. But she didn't want any of it. She came home instead. When she stepped into my modest house in Bridgeport, the same one with the chipped porch railing I never got around to fixing, She looked smaller somehow, not in height, but in pride. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. The same table we'd built together when she was 16, sanding down the edges ourselves. "Dad," she said, voice trembling, "you were right. I lost myself trying to be someone else." I nodded. "That's okay. Even lost things can be found." She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check, torn cleanly in half. "I kept the other piece," she said, "as a reminder." A single tear slipped down her cheek. I didn't need to say anything. Some lessons don't require words. Now it's 2026. Victoria runs a foundation for single parents called Table 18, the same number where I sat forgotten. Every year she hosts a charity dinner to help working-class moms and dads pay for their children's weddings. And every year she invites me to give the closing speech. I wear that same $89 rental tuxedo, still slightly tight in the shoulders, but when she introduces me now, she says, "This is my father, David Moore, the man who built everything I stand on." The applause never fails to sting my eyes, because sometimes justice isn't loud, it's quiet, like the sound of forgiveness finally landing. The video of my toast didn't just go viral, it metastasized. Clips surfaced with chirons like Plumber Dad vs. Old Money and the $340,000 check. Daytime talk shows reenacted it with actors in rental tuxes and fake hydrangeas. Comment sections turned into confessionals. Daughters apologizing to fathers, fathers admitting they'd stayed too quiet for too long. I didn't read most of it. I still had work. Water heaters still blew, old lines still groaned, winter still cracked what summer had made soft. The world doesn't restructure for your heartbreak. But Greenwich tried. Preston Whitmore, Sr., invited me to his office. The building had a lobby with marble floors that were so glossy they looked wet. An assistant in a suit that fit like skin led me to a conference room the size of my first apartment. The old man stood at the window with the posture of someone who had never been told no. "Mr. Moore," he said without turning, "you cost my family dearly." "Not as dearly as treating people like background," I said, and took a seat without being asked. He finally faced me. "This spectacle jeopardized relationships. Tenants called, partners called. Do you know how long it took to build our name?" "3 generations," I said. "I did my homework. Do you know how long it took me to build mine?" He didn't answer. I slid a thin folder across the table. Contracts, invoices, email threads. Everything ran through Moore Restoration and Plumbing Company by design, not to control you, to protect her. If someone stiffed a vendor, it wasn't going to be my kid holding a lawsuit, it was going to be me. That's what fathers do. We step between our children and the wolf. His jaw moved like he was chewing a memory. "You humiliated my son." "No," I said. "I humiliated entitlement. Your son just brought it to dinner." He stared, the kind of stare men use when they're deciding whether to see you or keep you in a category. Then something in his face loosened. Barely. "What do you want?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, and stood. "That's the part you don't understand. If I'd wanted something, I'd have asked for it 26 years ago." On my way out, the assistant, who couldn't have been more than 27, caught the door for me. "Mr. Moore," he said under his breath, "for what it's worth, my dad's a roofer." "Your speech." "Thanks." I nodded. The richest man in the room wasn't the one signing checks. Sometimes it's the kid who remembers tar under a father's nails. The planner called, voice raw at the edges. "David, I've got photographers asking if they're getting paid. The quartet, too." "They will," I said. "I'll square every dime that's owed." "That's never been the point." She exhaled like a tire losing air. I misjudged you." "Lots of people did," I said. "You weren't alone." I drove to the bakery that had made the 7-tier confectionery skyscraper. The owner, an older woman with flour on her elbow and kindness in her eyes, pushed a refund envelope across the counter. "We heard," she said, "and we heard why." The check cleared. "But you should take this." I pushed it back. "No, Mom. You did the work. Your people stood in a kitchen for 2 days, piping icing roses onto something richer folks will call simple anyway." She smiled. "You talk like a man who knows the price of hands." "I am," I said. At the florist's, a young guy apologized for the drama and comped a funeral arrangement for a neighbor of mine who'd lost his mother. Seems fitting, he said shyly, to send flowers for a real goodbye. Thank you, I said softly. The right kind of goodbye matters. By the time I left the rental company, the one that provided crystal and chairs and linen that cost more than wedding vows should, I'd paid every invoice, answered every question, and left each person with the same simple idea. A commitment is not a rumor. It's a ledger. You make good on it, even when your heart is in collections. 2 weeks after the wedding, I knocked on the door of the Whitmore brownstone where Victoria had been living. She answered in a sweater that swallowed her and eyes that did the same. Dad, she said, and already the word was a bridge. Walk, I suggested. We went along a river path that remembered how to be quiet. She told me things I already knew and things I didn't. How the Whitmores had corrected her accent, how their friends taught her which forks to use and which words to avoid, how the right school opened doors but the wrong story closed them again. How she'd begun to feel like a museum piece, displayed but not touched. I thought if I just substituted a better father, they'd stop looking at me like I was a scholarship, she whispered. I thought I could swap the truth like a centerpiece. And did it work? I asked. She shook her head. No, they liked me better until they didn't. And then they didn't like me at all. We stopped at a bench. The river did that thing water does when it pretends it's glass. You remember the porch we built? I asked. She half smiled. You measured twice. I cut once, and then we measured again because I was wrong. You weren't wrong, I said. You were learning. Measuring isn't suspicion, it's love. Before you put weight on something, you make sure it'll hold. She tried to laugh, but it caught. I didn't measure this, Dad. I just jumped. You're still here, I said. So is the ground. We sat with that. Some fixes need silence more than tools. When I dropped her at the brownstone, she hugged me in the doorway like a person who has learned the price of arms. Dinner on Sunday? She asked. Always, I said. And meant it exactly as it sounded. A plan and a promise. Richard Morrison finally called me. Gone was the certainty of a man accustomed to introductions with trumpets. Mr. Moore, he began, I owe you an apology. You owe her one, I said. I know, he replied, and I could tell from the clipped syllables that admitting it cost him. I let them call me Dad because it felt useful. I've made a career of standing where cameras like to point. And where mirrors don't, I said. He took it. Yes. Then start again, I said. Not with me. With the next kid who thinks you are the shortcut past shame. Tell them there isn't one. He was quiet for so long, I checked if the line was dead. Then, I can get sponsors for whatever she wants to build. Foundations like stories with endings. Help me, help her. You want to be useful? I asked. Yes, he said. Then pick up chairs, I said, and carry them where they're needed. He laughed, not mockery, surprise. Yes, sir. Sunday dinner started small. Spaghetti, garlic bread, the way we used to when money was a rumor. She brought a salad she actually ate and a letter she actually wrote. I won't read it to you, she said, setting the envelope by my plate. But it's the truth. No bows, no buzzwords, just what I did and why I'm not going to be that person again. Okay, I said. I'll read it when you leave. She exhaled. Thank you. After dishes, she reached into her bag and took out the half. The torn check, crisp edges softened by 2 weeks of being carried like a penance. Keep it, I said. As a reminder, she asked. As a receipt, I said. For what? She asked. For the lesson, I said. You paid in embarrassment. That ought to cover the balance. She laughed through tears, which is how you know a person is coming back to themselves. A blogger claimed I'd embezzled the vibe of a rich wedding. Another wrote that working-class rage was dangerous. A lawyer from someone's club sent a letter with words like tortious interference and loss of consortium and reputational damage. I sent back copies of invoices, a signed addendum from the planner acknowledging last-minute upgrades, and a short note. All vendors paid in full. No damages. No claim. Sometimes the best legal strategy is just doing what you said you'd do. The Whitmores didn't sue. They receded, first from the gossip pages, then from the rooms they used to teach were sacred. You can only teach a room it's holy if the people in it behave like it is. It started as a joke. Victoria texted me, "What if we helped other table 18? What would we call it?" I replied. She sent a photo from the wedding. Mine was the only table half in shadow, half in light. Table 18, she wrote, where the good people sit because someone has to be close to the kitchen. We launched Table 18 that fall in a union hall that smelled like coffee, wood polish, and stories. 30 chairs, 15 couples, 2 single parents who had the courage to come alone. We didn't promise fairy tales, we promised light. We covered deposits. We negotiated with vendors who had hearts. We created checklists that started with who is paying and ended with who feels seen. On opening night, the florist from the wedding showed up carrying centerpieces no one could afford but everyone deserved. The baker came with sheet cakes and a grin. Richard carried chairs. Preston Jr. didn't come, but his sister did. She gave the speech hers should have given at the wedding. Old money is just money that has been around long enough to become polite. Real wealth is the ability to say "I'm sorry" and mean it. Victoria told her story without theatrics. She didn't mention names. She named the feeling, the hunger to be enough in rooms that mistake polish for worth. When it was my turn, I didn't repeat the viral toast. I kept it short. Check your foundations. If they're love, you can build anywhere. People clapped the way people clap when they recognize a sentence they needed and didn't know how to ask for. At the end, an older man in a suit far nicer than mine waited by the door. He shook my hand the way a man who has lost and found does. "My daughter put me at a back table once," he said with a wry smile. It wasn't this dramatic, but it felt the same. "Thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For naming it," he said. In January, a nor'easter shoved the coast around like furniture. Pipes burst in a block of old row houses. My crews ran out of hours. I loaded my truck the way I used to, flashlight, propane torch, spare couplings, and went. The first house belonged to a nurse who worked nights and believed in other people's mornings. The basement looked like a mining movie. Water to the ankles, a symphony of dripping. I waded in. The copper line had split along a seam. I killed the mains. When the hiss eased, I could hear the house exhale. "You're David Moore," the nurse said when I came up, soaked. "From the video." "From the neighborhood," I corrected. She laughed. "Right." Then, after a beat, "My father would have liked you." "Mine too," I said. We patched lines for hours. At dawn, she tried to pay me triple. I took the normal rate and a coffee that tasted like a quiet victory. Driving home, I realized that night had erased whatever was left of my need to be understood. Wrongs had been named. Debts had been settled. The work was the work again. Sometimes that's the miracle. It goes back to being ordinary, and ordinary is enough. Spring warmed the world into color. Victoria called with a voice that had learned how to carry softness without apology. "Dad," she said, "we're doing Table 18 again. Bigger this time. Community center on 7th. 200 chairs. Would you give the closing talk?" "Only if there's spaghetti," I said. "There will be," she laughed. When I arrived, the hall looked like a promise that had decided to keep itself. Round tables with simple linens, centerpieces made from grocery store flowers and care, a band that knew how to play loud and still listen. She introduced me as my father, David Moore, the man who built what I'm standing on. The room stood up before I reached the mic. I hadn't expected to cry. I did anyway. "Thank you," I said when the noise settled, "for making room at the front for the people who used to sit by the kitchen." I told them the short version. Then I gave them a longer truth. Some of you are paying for things you were never thanked for. Some of you are ashamed of jobs you should be proud of. Some of you have children who don't understand you yet. Keep going. Build anyway. The water will break. The heat will fail. People will forget what held them up. And then, on the day they need you, you will be there because that's what love does. It returns, sometimes with a check, sometimes with a chair, sometimes with a hand. After, a teen in a thrift store blazer asked if plumbing was hard to learn. "Hard enough to make you proud," I said and gave him my card. "Come by the shop Saturday. We'll start with a torch and a prayer. Money bought my daughter a wedding that looked like a magazine you read in a dentist's office." Money also bought me the chance to remind her what couldn't be purchased. A childhood, a ledger of lunches made, the smell of sawdust on a Saturday, the sound of a man's boots by the door when a storm starts. People sent me sponsors and speaking invites, checks with commas for endorsements I didn't want. I took exactly one, a partnership to train trades apprentices for Table 18 families. If you want a forever gift, teach a kid a valve from a vent. They'll never again be at the mercy of a man who charges double because he thinks a girl won't know the difference. It took him a year. He called me on a Tuesday like a man learning the difference between pride and spine. "Mr. Moore," he said, "could we talk?" "Coffee?" I offered. At the diner, he looked smaller without the tux, not shorter, just less inflated. "I loved her," he said, eyes on his hands. "I just didn't know how to love all of her." "All of her includes the porch dust," I said, "not just the chandelier glow." He nodded. "I didn't know how to be poor with her." "You wouldn't have been," I said. "You just needed to be willing." He winced. Wounds answer to the right words like dogs to a whistle. "She's not coming back, is she?" he asked. "She went home," I said. "Sometimes that's the same as leaving. Sometimes it's the opposite." He paid for coffee. I left the tip. We shook hands like men who might not ever become friends, but will stop being strangers. That summer, I finally fixed the porch rail. It had been leaning like a tired man for 3 years. I pulled it down, sanded new balusters, primed them in the yard, while the radio played something older than me. When Victoria arrived, she grabbed a brush without being asked. We painted in quiet. Neighbors waved. The mailman complimented the color. When we finished, we sat on the steps and watched them dry like parents who got to see the long version. How something ugly turns pretty if you give it the time you never had. "Dad," she said after a while, "if you could do one thing differently." "Nothing," I said. "Even the mistakes got us here." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Even the wedding." "Especially the wedding," I said. "It taught the room where the front really is." She laughed softly. "Table 18, she said. "Front row," I said. "We outgrew the community center. We took over the old train depot and filled it with stories. A wall of photos labeled foundations, parents in uniforms, parents in boots, parents in clothes with grease and glory baked in. Sponsored trades programs ran in the back. Apprentices learned how to sweat copper, tie rebar, wire a breaker, read a blueprint, read a room. Richard still carries chairs. Preston Sr. sent a quiet check one Christmas with a note that said, "For the lights." I cashed it. Pride doesn't plug in a string of bulbs. Every year, Victoria introduces me the same way. "This is my father, David Moore. He built me a life and then taught me how to build my own." Every year, the clapping feels like the ocean finally deciding to be kind. When the room empties and we're alone, we walk the rows and straighten chairs no one will see until morning. We pick up napkins. We fold programs. We make the place ready for the next people who will need it. That's all love is, in the end. Quiet preparation for a world you hope will treat somebody else better than it treated you. We lock up. The hall goes dark. I listen for the old building's breath. It exhales. Pipes settle. Wood remembers it's strong. We step outside. The night is the kind that makes you think about beginnings more than ends. She slips her arm in mine. "Home?" she asks. "Always," I say, and we go.